All right, we are back. Coercive control, cults and community. It is a big event happening at Tennessee State Museum on Saturday, and 3 people who are going to be involved have joined me tonight here. Dylesia Barner, Debby Schriver, Bill Goldberg. We appreciate you spending an hour with us tonight.
Thank you.
In the break, I was listening to the conversation, and we're just talking about, as we define cults, and you said something about drinking the Kool-Aid, which has become pop culture.
Yes.
I vividly remember, luckily I grew up, I always wanted to do this as a living, and I had 2 college-educated parents who watched the news and read the newspaper, and so I was always aware of current events. And I remember clearly, I think it was 78 or 79, the Jim Jones, and I forget the name of his cult in
the People's Temple.
The People's Temple, that's right. It was in Central America or South America, Guyana, I think.
Yeah, Guyana.
Yeah, Guyana. I vividly remember, and for you younger folks, you'll have to Google it. But
yeah,
it
I
was
wasn't alive, but I know about it.
Tragic situation. Hundreds of people in a mass suicide. And vividly, I remember Time magazine, the cover of all the bodies.
Yeah.
Just terrible picture. Because they drank Kool-Aid laced with cyanide. That obviously is one of those big, heavily publicized historical cults. But we were talking about how smaller cults, as we define them, can be, as you use the word, mainstream.
Mainstream, yeah.
How subtle this can be. The church on the corner, or another type of group, a health kick kind of group out west somewhere in the heated tents or whatever, you know, putting people in real danger, and they just don't even realize it, right?
Right.
How do we recognize, you were saying people on the front lines, which is why this event is going on. Talk a little bit about the event and how we can help people recognize this stuff.
I think the event is a day long, and the International Occultic Studies Association and the University of Tennessee College of Social Work are co-sponsoring it. And you know, I think when we look at coercive control and the people who are victimized by cult leaders or any kind of spiritual abuse or abuse in general, the community needs to be a kind of place that can, in fact, encourage healthy living for them after that. And so that is one reason we're doing this conference, so that we can realize it's a community concern. And I think if we can all realize that coercive control and cults are not what we think of in terms of TV. It's not everybody in pastel dresses looking alike. It's really regular people.
Right.
And we need to sort of be aware of the signs. And if we have a gut feeling that something isn't right, probably we need to follow that gut feeling and inquire a little bit more and reach out to people.
Speaking of reaching out, I have a friend who used to live in this area, has moved away, and is now running a podcast. She grew up in, well, I'll say a Mennonite branch of the Mennonites in the Midwest. So I don't want to, blanket all of the Mennonite church here, but it was not a healthy environment, especially for females. And she's running a support podcast now and has a website. And so social media has really changed. There's so many people now who can reach out for help on social media. And there's someone who went through exactly what I did, and they can reach out and say, hey, I need some help or whatnot, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, the power of social media is...
Absolutely. And when former victims are dropped into a community, they don't really know how to even explain their past to anyone else. And so it's doubly hard for anyone to even find someone to go get help or talk to a friend. I mean, just think about normal behavior with high school students talking about their favorite movies back in the past. And I remember some of the children from Tony Alamo described to me that somebody asked them what their favorite Disney movie was when they were young, and they said, what's Disney?
They had no
they're
idea.
Constantly catching up. So people stay isolated. And so it's really important for us as a community to not let that happen.
Yeah, and you were talking about like social media.
We weren't
the
allowed.
ban of social media. Just
that reminds me of, in my college, like when I reflect upon college and people are like, yeah, I'm sure you went on spring break trips, and I didn't do any of that because even after getting out of the ministry, I did it to myself. I was still very much so spiritually abusing myself. I remember one day having fun, and I went back to my room and I was sad because I thought God was mad at me because I enjoyed myself too much that day. So it's the psychological repair that has to happen after you actually exit the
you have like a self-loathing almost. And it's because, I don't want to use the term brainwash.
I mean, that's what happens.
It's a real methodical process, isn't it?
It is.
Brainwashing it sounds so scary, but it's really just a intense coercive persuasion where they use techniques that all of us use, techniques of friendliness, techniques of group pressure, techniques of giving somebody answers, but it's the fact that they use it to the extent that they narrow a person's consciousness and narrow their choices. So it's on a continuum, but it's way over here on the continuum, where people give up just a piece of themselves, and they just do it gradually until they're way down here. They don't even realize how much of themselves they've given up. The whole process of getting somebody to see that you have the only answer and labeling all of their doubts as being either inspired by the devil if it's a religious group, or their unhealthy mind if it's a therapy cult, or
they can blame family members in their past and their childhood, and just go down the list.
So you give them a devil that's trying to keep them from learning the truth, and sometimes again it's the literal devil, and you redefine their healthy personality as something that's holding them back from listening to the truth. And it can happen to any of us under the right set of circumstances. People that join cults, they're not looking for people that are stupid. They're not looking for people that are believers in nature. They're not looking for those people because they don't do the work of the cult. The work of the cult might be fundraising, might be getting other people in. In the Alamo Foundation, Debbie can talk better than I about all the ways they had of making money. They don't want people that are mentally ill in the cults. They kick them out very quickly. They want people that are good, hard workers that have the same kind of characteristics we want our kids to have.
I'm wondering about, the obviously there's got to be post-traumatic stress with someone who's come out, and a sense of shame.
Embarrassment
And shame of, especially if you're a smart, hardworking person, like you said, where you look back and you think, how did I let this happen? And you've got to work through that. I mean, that can take years.
And it's not, again, my heart is really with the children, but after writing the book about the children, I had a number of calls from the parent generation saying, how could you write about the kids? They were fine. They went into families and got cared for. And they said it should be about us. And what I realized in that moment was that they were just now having to deal with what they had let happen to their children.
I can relate to that too. When I tell my story, I've learned to omit the aspect of it that my mom took me, because I found that people would hang on to that more than they would what actually happened in the cult. So they'd say, why would your mom do that? Like, whose mom takes them to stuff like that? So I just started to conveniently not include that because I didn't want my mom to become the perpetrator and not the actual perpetrator. So that's true.
How is your relationship with your family now?
Pretty similar to how it was prior to. I think that now that we're all out of it, we can see. I'm a little bit more vocal than the rest of my family, so a lot of times I might share a story and they'll act like they've never heard of it and it didn't really happen. So I think that there's certain levels of consciousness, like I'm willing to be a little bit more of an advocate about what actually occurred, where they're a little more silent. Have
you dealt with patients who have buried things so deep that, like she said, that they will say, well, that never happened.
Yeah.
When perhaps something did, or was so traumatic, or the mind.
Sometimes what happened was so terrible that they have to block it out.
Yeah.
And sometimes the first generation, the parents who joined and might have had children, are so guilty that they want to see it in a different light, and they're just so guilty they can't deal with what they did to their children.
Right.
And then the goal is to help both generations to deal with it. Yes, you made a mistake, and yes, it was a tragic mistake, but you made the best decision that you could under the circumstances with the information that you had. You were manipulated.
Right.
The cults break the social contract. They're not honest with people. They portray themselves as one thing when really they're something very different. And if we're used to people being pretty honest, and most of the time people are, and we get a sense of people, and usually we feel we can trust our instincts, then we can fall for that. And I try to help with the first generation to help them to recognize, again, they made the best decision they could at the time. And with the second generation, I can't tell them don't be angry.
Yeah.
I can just say, understand what your parents were going through. That doesn't mean you don't have a right to be upset.
Sure.
But understand what was going on with them, and maybe there can be some kind of reconciliation in that way.
Yeah, that's a healthy way to deal with it, because obviously anger would be, and frustration. What about dealing with the generations, though? Dealing with that, I just can't get over a child re-assimilating into today's world. We have stories of I forget the name of the family that had all their kids pretty much locked up for years and years, and their exposure to you. I mean, you just have to ease them back in slowly, right?
And
the trust issues too.
The trust issues are really, really deep. And there are certainly some children that never really will totally recover.
Right.
But they thrive. They learn to thrive rather than just survive. And I've found in particular the children that I've met from Alamo they're very smart, they're very good employees, because they were really punished if they weren't. So they know how to go by the rules, and they present very well. And those skills can help them be successful in lots of ways. And there's still a lot of work to do inside.
Right.
So when we talk also just about coercive control, separate from cults, I mean, this can happen. We had this big case a few years ago here in Tennessee with a school teacher and a young, 14, 15-year-old student, convinced her, parents are bad, I'm the source of everything for you, and love and whatnot, a very vulnerable, innocent girl, and then took off cross country with her.
Wow.
And she willingly went along. And he abused her along the way, and then finally was caught out in the woods in a cabin in California. She had to go through a lot of therapy, but I mean, it can be just a one-on-one type of situation like that. I mean, he had, for a while there, complete control over this young lady.
Sure. Adolescents are trying to break away from the feeling that I'm so-and-so's kid, and that's who I am. They're flexing their muscles. They're trying to say, I am my own person. That's why late adolescents are particularly vulnerable to cults, because even the ones that are very close to their parents want to push away, and that's normal and healthy, and sometimes not easy to live with if you're a parent, but it's a good, healthy thing. And with most young adults, they'll get through that time, and they'll come to not feel so.
It's a process of maturing.
Exactly.
So we all go through.
But if somebody comes along at the wrong time and says, yes, your parents are there, it's terrible. They don't trust you. They won't let you stay out late at night. Here, I trust you. I know that you're even better than they are, because you're more spiritual. You're purer than they are. It can be very heady stuff, and people can fall for that.
It's so predatory.
Timing is everything.
Wow. Speaking of timing, it is time for us to take another break, everybody. Our final full segment is coming up after this, and we'll talk more about this event on Saturday and how perhaps you can get involved. Stay with us.